This unit is on cell structure and function, so what we'll take a look at in this chapter is the basic unit of all living things. Before we can understand about multicellular organisms, we must understand the basic unit of all living things, and this is a cell. So just a minute ago I said all living things. So when we look at living things, we look at the theory is that all living things must be made of cells. And these cells are the smallest working units of all living things. And those cells must come from pre-existing cells through cell division. A cell is the smallest unit that is capable of performing life functions. So when we look at this example of some cells, we see that some living things are basically single cell, such as this amoeba and this bacteria, whereas other multicellular organisms, such as our cells or plants, we have specialized cells. So this would be an example of a plant stem cell. This is an example of a nerve cell and a red blood cell. So when we look at multicellular organisms, we have different cells that have different functions, therefore they have different shapes. And when we look inside, sometimes we see more parts or missing parts of the models that we're going to take a look at in this chapter. So when we look at these cells, we're looking at, models of cells so we can look at all the various parts inside and their functions. When we look at all living things must be made of one of two kinds of cells. Those cells are called prokaryotic cells or eukaryotic cells. The easiest way for you to remember this is to look at the prefix and suffix of words. So if we break this word down, prokaryotic, we see the word pro means beginning, karyote means cell. So prokaryotic cells, if you put those two words together, beginning cells. So what does that mean? It basically means these are the types of cells that existed on the earth at the beginning of history. So life on earth at the beginning of history was only made of simple bacteria. So the only living things today that are made of prokaryotic cells are bacteria. All other living things on the earth are made of what we call eukaryotic cells. The prefix EU means true. So these are true cells. What does it mean to be a true cell? Well, a true cell means that the genetic material inside of that cell is separate from the rest of the cell by a membrane. So that structure is basically called a nucleus. So eukaryotic cells have a true nucleus. So let's take a look more at a prokaryotic cell, bacteria, okay? They're very simple organisms, very simple cells, living things. They are an organism. But when we look at prokaryotic cell, we define it by not having structures inside, not on the outside, that's surrounded by membranes. So sure, it has a membrane around it. It has several membranes. It has a cell wall on the outside. It has a cell membrane, and some of them even have a capsule around them. Okay, but when we talk about the definition, we're looking at the inside. So if you look inside of this cell, we don't see a membrane around all this DNA. We don't see a membrane around these ribosomes. Therefore, this is how we characterize a prokaryotic cell. If you look inside, this bacteria is very simple. It has genetic material, so it can duplicate itself and pass its genes on. It has cytoplasm to hold its structure together. And the only other thing you see inside are ribosomes. And what ribosomes do is they actually make proteins. So bacteria are very, very simple living things. When we look again at this model, not all bacteria have these outer features. All of them have a cell membrane, all of them have a cell wall, all of them have cytoplasm and what we call a nucleoid, where the DNA is located, and all of them have ribosomes. But some of them have special features, such as these little pili or flagella that help them attach to surfaces and help them move in fluids. And some of them have a capsule where it's kind of like a sealed off gelatin layer that protects them from extreme environments, either cold or hot. And once that temperature is to normal, then the capsule can actually disappear, and it's kind of a protective like thing. Some bacteria have those, but all of them have the nucleoid, cytoplasm, ribosomes, cell membrane, and remember, cell wall. Eukaryotic cells, or true cells, have this true nucleus. So you see right here, this is a membrane that separates this DNA. Okay, so all of it, again, here, separates the DNA. So not only do we have a true nucleus, but if you look inside, you see all kinds of other little structures that are all separate with their own little membranes. So we call these little structures that have membranes in eukaryotic cells, we call them organelles. Why are they called organelles? Because each one of them functions kind of like a little organ where they have a very specialized function for that cell. So most living things, again, are made of eukaryotic cells. The most common types of cells, of course, are multicellular organisms, are plants and animal cells. So let's take a look at some of these features inside some of these organelles that you're going to have to recognize and be able to tell the functions of. So if we look on the outside of this animal cell, we see this is surrounded by a cell membrane or plasma membrane. And we see we have a liquid fluidy part that has a little protein in it, kind of like a jello. That kind of gives the inside some structure and support. That's called the cytoskeleton. We have special structures we see only during cell division. Those are called centrioles. Of course, we have our nucleus, where we have our DNA located. We have inside something called the nucleolus. And we have little pores on our nuclear membrane. Outside we see these kind of little hallway or little highway looking things. These basically are called endoplasmic reticulum. We have two kinds. We have smooth and rough. If it's a rough ER, we see ribosomes on it. If it doesn't have the little ribosomes on it, it's called smooth. Here we have something called Golgi apparatus. Lysosomes or mitochondria, and then sometimes we see, again, these are monos, that we have a flagellum. The only animal cell that has a flagellum that beats back and forth for movement is a sperm cell. So we kind of wanted to add that. And sometimes we actually see little hair-like structures come off of animal cells called cilia that beat back and forth. In the human body, we have these little structures in our respiratory system. So if you look at this one over here, we see a few little differences in our plant cell. We see this big, large organelle in the middle. This is called a vacuole, and inside that vacuole is water and sugar. And this is the plant. The plant makes its own sugars, stores its water in this large vacuole. So that's a big difference between our plant and our animal cell. We also see these green structures in the plant cell that we do not see in an animal cell, and these are chloroplasts. This is the site of photosynthesis where plants make their own sugar, glucose, and then they store it. So they're able to capture sunlight, go through the process of photosynthesis, and create their own glucose. So they don't need to eat. So we say these are autotrophs, we are heterotrophs. So since we cannot make our own food, we do not have chloroplasts, nor do we have a vacuole. One other special feature we want to make sure we can look at that the difference is that plant cells, every plant cell has a tough cell wall. And that cell wall is made of a carbohydrate called cellulose, and it's very tough. And if you look at animal cells, we don't have that. But you kind of want to ask yourself, why don't we have that? And the reason why animal cells do not have a cell wall is because the purpose of the cell wall is for structure and support. So if you think about an animal, what are some of the things that give an animal, multicellular animal, structure and support? Well, some of the things that may have come to mind are bones, or exoskeletons in insects, or shells. So animals have other types of support structures. Therefore, we do not need a cell wall in every one of our cells. So plants get their support from their cell wall. So the three main differences between plants and animals are: plants have a large vacuole, plants have chloroplast, plants have cell walls, animal cells do not have any of those three. Okay, so again, here's your animal cell. Just take a look at it again. Of course, we have the cell membrane, endoplasmic reticulum. Here's rough ER. Here's smooth. You don't see the little ribosomes. Mitochondria, lysosomes, mitochondria again, Golgi apparatus, nucleus. We see DNA or chromatin here. We have nuclear pores, nuclear membrane. We have these other structures coming off the Golgi bodies. These little things are called vesicles that we'll take a look at that transport materials out of the cell. Typical animal cell. Notice you see some of the similar structures: smooth ER, rough ER, nucleus, nucleolus. Okay, we see chloroplast. Different. Again, this big vacuole that's storing water and waste. And again, your cell wall. So let's make sure we know all the, now that we kind of identified them all, let's look at functions. So the cell membrane is the outermost part of our cell, and its function is to control what enters and leaves the cell. It's a double layer of phospholipids, and we will concentrate on this in detail in the next chapter. The cell wall, again, is found plants in some autotrophic bacteria, and it helps give them support and protection. All bacteria contain cell walls. It's just made of a little slightly different material than a plant's is. All right, the nucleus directs cell activities and separates the cytoplasm by a nuclear membrane. It contains genetic material, DNA. It has a membrane around it, and it's made of 2 layers, and it only allows certain materials to enter and leave that nucleus. Mostly what we call messenger RNA, which we'll identify later this year. Right inside we see here the loosely packed DNA is called chromatin, but when a cell is about to divide, this DNA actually condenses into little X-like structures called chromosomes. So when a cell is about to divide, you can actually see the chromosomes appear. And they contain the instructions and traits and characteristics of living things. Inside the nucleus, we find a structure called the nucleolus, and it contains the information where RNA is made to help build proteins. The cytoplasm is a gel-like mixture, mostly waters and proteins. The endoplasmic reticulum is basically its function is for movement of materials around in the cell. If it's smooth ER, it lacks the ribosomes. If it's rough, it contains the ribosomes. So smooth ER actually has a function. It actually makes lipids or fats, and rough ER is going to have ribosomes because proteins are made there and then transported through the little hallways. So I try to kind of give my students a little we'll go kind of through some analogies here in a few minutes, but ER will identify endoplasmic reticulum. Think of it as an emergency room with all the hallways and things are moving back and forth. Ribosomes, we see ribosomes 2 places, on rough ER and also what we call free ribosomes. On the free ribosomes, this is again where proteins are produced. Most of them are produced for inside the cell on free ribosomes. Mitochondria, mighty mitochondria, is where energy is produced through the process of cellular respiration. We make the energy ATP. Inside here, we use glucose and oxygen, and we give off carbon dioxide and water. Our Golgi bodies are packaging material, so if a protein is made or a lipid is made and something has to add to it, let's say a sugar, and be processed a little bit more before it leaves the cell, it will go to the Golgi bodies to be packaged up. And once it's all packaged up, The material leaves and pinches off through another little structure called a vesicle, and this little vesicle will carry the material outside of the cell. A lysosome is for digestion, so think of it as your waste or your trash can. So this is a digestive plant. It breaks down, lots of different, worn out parts in a cell, or if a foreign bacteria enters in, it contains these enzymes that are able to break those things down. Vacuoles are for storage of digestion and waste, mostly, of course, of water and waste products, and it's also important because it helps maintain plant shape. Chloroplasts are usually found in plant cells. They contain the green pigment chlorophyll that's able to trap sunlight, and this is where photosynthesis takes place, where they are able to take in carbon dioxide and water and convert that to glucose and give off the gas oxygen. Okay, that's it.